gentlemen, I think having heard Nigel, are you able to hear me now? Sorry about that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, having heard Nigel, we now know that he's not only the best leader of any party in this country, but he is the best voice for this country against the European Union and for us to come out of the Now we're going to have a little question and answer session. Most of it answered by Nigel again, I'm afraid, or getting him on his feet. And the first question actually comes from Naomi Bishop, and I'm going to link it with another question by Mr. B. Steed. The question from Naomi is, what hardships do you foresee as a result of us leaving the EU? And the other one by Mr. Steed is, are we going to be better off if we get out of the EU?
Well, Naomi, I don't foresee any hardships at all. Because again, the only argument, the only single economic argument against us leaving the EU is the argument they wouldn't buy our motor cars, they wouldn't buy our products. Right, okay, fine. We do manufacture motor cars in the UK, which we sell to European markets. But had you noticed, there's quite a few German motor cars on our roads as well. Actually, they sell us 800,000 cars a year more than we manufacture and sell to them. There is a trade deficit of nearly 50 billion sterling a year between Britain and Europe. The point being, they need us more than we need them. The point being, in a modern global economy, people buy and sell goods with each other right across the world. You don't need to be in a political union to buy and sell widgets or motor cars or whatever other goods it was. So, Naomi, there are no hardships because we'll go on doing business. The day after we leave the EU, we'll go on doing business. You know, I'm going to go on buying that bottle of Rioja that I really quite like, and we'll go on doing it. But in the Mr. Steve's question, I am not going to stand here and tell you that by leaving the European Union, all of our problems will be solved. That would be ridiculous. But what I am going to tell you, Mr. Steed, where are you? Where's Mr. Steed? There. Oh, was it Mrs. Steed? I'm sorry. I do apologise. Well, I was half right, anyway. But what I'm going to tell you is this, that only by leaving the European Union and getting back control of our own lives, getting back control of the levers, being the masters of our own destiny, can we put in place the kind of policies that suit British companies and suit British workers and allow us, for the first time in years, to put our own people first.
Thank you very much, Nigel. The next question, again, I think you may answer as well. And when do you think the referendum will be held? This is Mr. Gethin James who asked that question.
Okay. When will the referendum be held? I don't know. I originally thought that what Dave would try to do would be to do a quick, botched renegotiation and put it to the British people as quickly as he could to stop our side of the argument building up our campaign against the perceived status quo. But for that to happen, his referendum had to kick into gear. Now, the first time he tried to renegotiate was at the October summit of the European leaders, where they were bedevilled with the Greek crisis, with the migrant crisis, which I might talk a bit more about perhaps in a moment. And he got to speak at 1:05 in the morning at dinner, and he spoke for 7 minutes, in the middle of which Monsieur Hollande went out for a pee. Now, you might laugh, it's true. which would suggest the renegotiation is not going very well. It is perfectly clear there is no real renegotiation going on at all. He started off his Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, by saying there must be significant treaty change. That's gone. Dave himself said about a year ago, we must deal with the free movement of people. That's gone. We even have leaks from inside Brussels that even changing migrant benefits may well be vetoed by Poland, Slovakia, Hungary and other countries. Things are not going well with this so-called renegotiation, and I suspect that actually it will now not be in the first half of next year as I'd originally thought. I suspect September, October next year is the earliest possible opportunity. It may even slip into the spring of 17. But the migrant crisis, if I can just elaborate for a second, and even if you don't want me to, I'm going to, so there we are. But this migrant crisis shows you how badly run the European Union is. We all know, we in this country know to respect genuine refugees, don't we? We've done it for centuries. My own family, going back to the 1700s, were French Protestants, being burnt at the stake, a practice some in Westminster may well wish to bring back today, for all I know. That's certainly true, that bit. But we did that for French Huguenots. We did what we could to help Jewish people from Russia, from Germany, from Austria. We did the same, if you remember, for the Ugandan Asians. This country needs no lessons from the rest of Europe about looking after people who are genuine refugees. But there's a massive difference between doing that and sending out a message, as my friend Mr. Juncker did back in April, backed up in the most ludicrous way by Angela Merkel, saying that anyone that comes and sets foot on European soil qualifies as an asylum seeker and can stay. It was complete and utter madness. It has led to a stampede. Amongst that, of course, there are some genuinely suffering people who've come from real misery. But the majority of what's coming are economic migrants looking to use this crisis as a way of bettering their lives, and mixed in among them are ISIS jihadists who wish to use this crisis to destroy our way of life, and we have got to protect and defend our way of life. And if that wasn't bad enough, what happened last weekend? Out of the blue, like a white rabbit being pulled out of a top hat, the European leaders met and said they've decided to give Turkey 3 billion euros and to give 75 million Turks visa-free access to the Schengen zone from next year and to fast-track their membership of the European Union. And by the way, David Cameron and is it Jezza, the late, I don't know what he's called, that chap, but I'd never heard of him before, had you? But the Labour and Conservative parties support this fully. We are now on a process to fast-tracking Turkey to be full members with us of a European political union. That will mean free, open access to Britain, to our health service, to our education system, to 75 million people, even poorer than the last migrant wave that came from Romania and from Bulgaria. It will mean opening up ourselves to a country that I regret to say has become more fundamentalist over the course of the last decade. It will mean opening ourselves up to a country, 95% of which isn't even in Europe, it's in Asia. And it will mean opening up ourselves to a group of people whose culture, frankly, is fundamentally different to ours. I think, in a funny sort of way, what the Merkel-led, and by the way, everything in Europe now is Merkel-led, never with a smile, but there we are. And I think maybe what happened last weekend will prove the tipping point with the British public. They say it's risky to leave the European Union. That's what Lord Rose will say. I put it to you, it's even riskier to stay in a European Union on the verge of opening up its doors to the whole of Turkey.
Well, I'm not sure whether Nigel actually answers these questions, does he?
Oh, I do, and then I do my own thing, you know.
I think, unlike most of the politicians, we get a straight answer from Nigel every single time. I think this is a very important and very interesting question here. It's from Dave Bevan, and he says, why are we closing efficient coal-fired power stations when Germany are building 25 new ones, and why are they getting away with it?
Yeah, well, this in fact came up on Question Time last night for those that watched it. And I talked earlier a bit about wind energy. I didn't really touch much on coal. So, as a result of a European Union directive over which we can do nothing, called the Large Combustion Plant Directive. Now, you all feel better for knowing that, don't you? But as a result of this directive, we have closed in the last year at Longannet in Scotland. We've closed in Kent, one on the Isle of Grain. We've closed Eggborough in Yorkshire. We're about to close Ferrybridge. Anyone who's ever driven up the A1 has seen those massive chimneys. Well, that's about to close next year. So we're closing our coal-fired generation. We're substituting it with wind, predominantly, and now a bit of solar. So flawed is this policy, not just that it makes our electricity expensive for manufacturing, as I described earlier, it's far worse than that. By the end of next year, our excess capacity in energy generation in the United Kingdom will be 2%. It means that if we have one major failure, from the end of next year, the lights will go out over Britain. Now, some are old enough to remember this happening back in 1974. I loved it. It was the best excuse for not giving in homework that one could ever possibly have had. But can you imagine in a high-tech economy reliant on computers what the impact would be of us turning out the lights, and yet a combination of European policy and useless British government, whether it's Labour or Conservative, has led us to this pass. The Germans are cleverer than that. The Germans are better led than we are. And whilst Merkel recognised that it was a problem to have coal-fired power stations under the old model, she was able to build new coal-fired power stations, fiendishly cleverly, that passed that European Union directive. And I remember last April driving from Brussels to go and speak at a meeting like this, but a meeting in Cologne, a meeting of a Eurosceptic German political party. It felt rather like UKIP, I have to say. And I remember being shocked at seeing the number of huge coal-fired power stations. So Dave Bevan is right. The Germans are building 24 huge coal-fired power stations to maintain their energy security, to keep their cost of electricity, which are now half what British industry is paying, at the same time as we are being closed down by EU directives that don't suit British circumstances, and have a government that doesn't have the vision or the balls, frankly, to plan for the future of our nation.
Well, thank you, Nigel. The next question, I think, is begging for us to have a little bit of a pat on our back, because it says, why do you feel UKIP performed so well in Wales?
What you got there?
In two major elections in Wales in a row, we have come either second or third. And quite frankly, in the last general election, UKIP got 4 million votes. And it was kind of one of those hangover moments where just before the election, we truly believed that we would get justice in the world and there would be a dozen UKIP MPs. And when we woke up in the morning, there was only one. And many of my colleagues were feeling quite down and quite depressed by this. I wasn't. I was absolutely over the moon because in Wales, we had beaten Plaid Cymru. We had every single candidate that stood in all 40 constituencies in Wales had gained their deposits back. We'd come second in 6 seats. We did incredibly well. I mean, Plaid Cymru lost 8 deposits and Lib Dems 26 in Wales. So we did fantastically, and I think the reason is we've had 15 years of absolute failure by the Labour-led government in the Welsh Assembly. And I think that's the reality of it. Let's just call a spade a spade. The reality is we deserve so much better in Wales than the government that we have, than the NHS. The NHS service that we are getting, the ambulance service, education, where we're scoring PISA results behind Estonia and Latvia. I mean, it's just shameful. It's unbelievable. And I think the people of Wales have finally had enough, and they've realised that there is an alternative, and that they do not have to continue voting the way that their grandparents and their parents voted. That kind of thing is gone, isn't it? How often do you hear, oh, we're Labour in this house, or that kind of mentality? People are actually, the scales have fallen from their eyes and have realised that if we do deserve better, then we need a change. And the only real change that we will get, and thank heavens we have a Welsh Assembly election next year, we can make that change, is by voting for people.
This is the last question of the evening. I'm sorry for those of you who submitted questions and that they've not been asked, but we have to accept the fact that Nigel has driven all the way down from Grimsby last night. I don't think he was actually on a fishing vessel, but apart from that, he's driven all the way down from Grimsby. He's got an exhausting schedule, as we all know, and therefore I'm going to make this the last question. It's asked by the Swansea branch chairman Anthony Roper, asks it on behalf of Dr. James Waddle. I am concerned that the referendum will be rigged in some way, as the political elite will not want the UK to leave the EU.
Well, that's certainly true. Mr. Lord Kinnock doesn't want us to leave the EU. That's absolutely true. And we know that. In terms of rigging the referendum, well, look, Mr. Cameron has tried to load the dice as heavily as he can in his favour. But actually, he's been picked up more than once. Firstly, the Electoral Commission said the question he proposed wasn't fair. The question should be a straightforward, do you wish to remain in the European Union or leave the European Union? So that's the first victory we've struck in the interest of fairness. Secondly, there is the issue of purdah. For those who don't know about it, what it means is during an election period, government offices, government officers should not be allowed to say things that are partial to an election. He tried to change those rules. He was overruled by Parliament. And thirdly, I assumed he would use the Conservative Party's database of members and online supporters to lobby for a yes vote. The Conservative Party board have said no, all that data must remain neutral. So we are getting closer to having a free and fair referendum that I could have even dreamt of 6 months ago. There is one danger, I guess. The danger is we vote to leave, and then our conniving politicians do their best to try and renegotiate something and not make that happen. And that is why we in UKIP and our like-minded friends across the continent in our political group, even if we win this referendum, we need a strong UKIP in Britain to make sure not only that the British people vote the right way, but that our politicians fulfil their wishes. I believe we can win this referendum, but we must not be stabbed in the back by those who don't respect the result. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, can I again thank you for coming along this evening and making the contribution that you have made. Firstly, can I thank Nathan Gill, who is the leader of the UK Independence Party in Wales. And again, can you show your appreciation for the best leader of any party in the country and the best voice against the European Union?